Hi, everybody. This is Mrs. Wagner. I hope you all are staying safe and staying healthy and washing your hands and maybe even enjoying your break a little bit. Today, what we're going to take a look at is the beginning of Anchor 6 Part 2, which is a continuation of genetics. If you grabbed your biology folder before we left for break, you do have these notes printed for you. They are attached to the Anchor 6 Part 1 notes where we were talking about Punnett squares and crosses. If you didn't bring your biology folder home, you can find these on Google Classroom. They are there for you to print out or to take a look at as well. The second slide are a series of questions that you should already know, things that we've covered already in biology. This is one of the assignments for you in Google Classroom. So if you haven't answered any questions yet, stop the video, answer these questions first, and then come back and join us as we begin Anchor 6 Part 2. So after you answer those questions in Google Classroom, what I do want to start with is this question right here. So before we left, we were talking about genetics, right? We were talking about Punnett squares and taking a mom and crossing them with a dad and seeing how the babies would turn out. When we're talking about this in real life, how do you think that our cells know what those letters mean? So for example, if we're doing a Punnett square and we say that mom has brown eyes and dad has blue eyes, and we do a little Punnett square, we can see that all of the offspring would have brown eyes if brown is dominant. How does our cell in our eye know what to do with that information? Do you think that there's a little person in our eyes doing Punnett squares trying to figure out what is going on? In other words, how do you think that those genes are expressed? How do our eyes know what color to make them, to make the irises? That's where we're going to focus our next discussion of genetics. We know that in cells, everything is done by molecules and the little organelles inside of your cells. So let's recap. You know that we have genetic information, the double helix, which we know is DNA. And one of these sequences right here is something we could call a gene. What that actually represents is a series of bases, right? Again, review, that could represent that A is with T is with A is with T, C is with G, T was with A, and we have a sequence of DNA right here. That is a gene. That's where the instructions for you are held, is in the sequence of those bases. We also know that a really, really, really long piece of DNA is coiled up into a chromosome, and those things are found inside of your cells in the nucleus of every single one of your cells. If we're reviewing some stuff, we know that there are actually 46 of those chromosomes inside every single nucleus in your body. That's where our genetic information is stored. So what does that mean? If we're using that example of the eye color on the previous slide, this code of DNA right here actually represents one of those genes. Maybe that sequence is a genetic code for brown eyes. So the code for brown eyes is carried on a gene in a series of A's and T's and C's and G's in chromosomes in your nucleus. So your cells are able to take this information, this is like a code, and use it to express your eye color, for example, if we're sticking with that throughout this. But genes aren't directly useful for expressing for expressing your genetics. In other words, genes don't do the work. Instead, those sequences in the genes, so the A's and T's and C's and G's, tell your body what proteins to build, and the proteins are the important part. The proteins are how your cells express their genes. They're going to go out and do all the functions of the body. So let's use our example of eye color again. So let's say from dad, you received a gene on this chromosome that is capital B. That's the dominant gene for brown eye color. If we look at what that actually means, is in this sequence of DNA, in this sequence of A's and T's and C's and G's, that tells your cells to build a protein called melanin. So we're going to give this protein a name. For eye color, it's melanin. So people that receive 2 copies, big B, are going to have a lot of melanin deposited in their eye. We see that as brown. Now let me flip ahead again. On the opposite end of that, what if your dad or your mom gave you instead the lowercase b? So dad gave you lowercase b, mom gave you lowercase b. That is going to be a completely different sequence of A's and T's and C's and G's that's going to code for no melanin, so no protein gets made. So when we look at somebody with blue eyes, they are little b. Oh, I'm sorry. And their DNA told their body to make no protein, to make no melanin. On the other end of this, as we looked, someone that has brown eyes, their genotype is big B, and that told their body to make a protein, lots of it, called melanin, and that is deposited in the eyes, and we get the appearance of brown eyes. So over here, when we were talking about DNA or genes are not what actually do the work in your body, it's the proteins that do all of the work in your body. That's what we were talking about. Okay, so that is the big idea with how genes are expressed. So we have our gene on a chromosome, which is actually made up of DNA, and then that DNA has the instructions for making protein. In our example for eye color, it was melanin. So that process is what we're going to be studying over the next few days. We call this process gene expression. So how DNA, that instruction, codes for proteins so that our genes can be expressed. You almost want to think of our DNA as like if you build Legos, it's the instruction that comes in those Legos, and then what do? You put them together to build a product, build some sort of whatever. That's kind of what goes on with gene expression. Now remember, we're talking about things going on very, very tiny. We're talking about in your cells, and we're doing this with molecules. So DNA is a molecule, protein is a molecule. So we're talking things really, really, really tiny that we can't see. But how does this happen? This is a common process in all organisms that we call the central dogma. You'll hear us use that word a lot. And that just means that all organisms do this, and this is how all organisms get their genes expressed. So the first step is taking the instructions in DNA and turning them into something that's useful. We call that process transcription. Then the cell is able to read the RNA, the message, and build a protein out of that. We call that the central dogma. That's how all things express their genes. There's another kind of analogy to help you think about this. Let's pretend you work for a pizza shop and there's a top secret recipe locked in the office to build that pizza. That's kind of like our DNA. In us, the DNA is locked in the nucleus. In order to build that pizza, we need to get the information out. So what can you do? You can copy down the recipe on another piece of paper on a message and take it out to the kitchen. So think of the RNA as like the recipe. We can copy it down and take it out of the nucleus, out into the cytoplasm for the cell to use it. Now, once you get that recipe out of the office, you can go into the kitchen and put the ingredients together to build your pizza. That's kind of like the protein. So if that makes any sense to you, that's kind of an easy way to think about what's going on. We have a top secret code in the nucleus. It can't leave. So we need to copy it down to a message. That's your recipe. And then that recipe can go out into the cytoplasm and be used to build a protein. So over the course of this week, we're going to ask you to do a few things. One of those, if we were together in person, we would have had you read a Central Dogma article. That is also posted on Google Classroom. So make sure you're reading that. And then there's some questions that go along with the reading that we're asking you to also answer in Google Classroom. Thank you for listening. As you know, if you need any excuse me, if you need any help, you have any questions, reach out to one of your teachers and we would be more than happy to help you work through this. Talk to you soon.